Welcome back to our podcast. It's funny because it's true with me, Tim Clyde.
Me, Alex McQueen.
Where we try to work out what makes stuff funny.
What's at the heart of comedy?
Yeah, the DNA, the secret source of laughter. And we've had some great guests, haven't we, Alex? We had Matt Lucas talk about writing comedy.
Rob Brydon talking about performing comedy.
Yeah, Billy Snedden, how we edit comedy, how we end up...
Chris Addison talking about directing comedy.
Yeah, but I think we worked out it would be quite fun to do something a bit different.
This is a slight curveball.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the science of comedy.
Yeah.
And this week, today, we have in our midst, as our guest, a brilliant scientist.
A neuro
Indeed.
scientist.
From the University College London.
Yes, a professor.
Professor Sophie Scott, CBE. We're not going to say sir, but we're nearly there, as well as I understand it, because you've been written to by the King or the Queen?
It was the Queen.
The Queen. Yeah. What did the Queen write to you about, darling?
She wrote. She very kindly gave me a CBE, so I'm a commander of the Royal Order of the British Empire or something.
And how did that literally materialise? Did you get a letter through the post?
I got an email during the first lockdown from Downing Street, and I thought it was a scam.
Did you? Great. So you weren't expecting.
I was not.
So you'd not had any you hadn't been taken for coffee by the Queen's private secretary for a little. Now listen, we're thinking. No, nothing.
No,
it just
nothing.
came out the blue.
I think in retrospect, I did the Royal Institution Christmas lectures in 2017, and if you look at the list of Royal Institution lecturers over the years, many of them
get a CBE.
Have an honour. So I suspect it's the very nice people at the Royal Institution.
You've done some stand-up as well as this vastly intellectual, scientific understanding of the neurons and everything that's going on inside us. But are you also touching human?
So I need to be very careful not to mislead you. I have done stand-up. I don't know if that translates into you could actually accurately describe it as a stand-up. There's a UCL, my university, a few years ago started doing something called Bright Club, which was basically a science communication night or outreach, really. They ran these comedy nights, and all the performers would be students and staff from the university, and there'd be a professional emceeing it and a professional headliner. And I didn't want to do it, and then I got gypped into it through professional jealousy because one of my colleagues did it, and then I thought, this is fascinating and I want to learn how to do it. So I'm part of a very small science comedy scene, and I run a night, if you're interested, at the Bloomsbury Studio at the Bloomsbury Theatre in London. There's one of those every.
And when you say you run a night, is that once a week, once a month?
It's not even that. It's it's once a term, or maybe three or four times a year. And but again, all the performers are staff and students, undergraduates, postgraduates at university.
UCL based or London University, all over
UCL based.
So that brings us maybe to an initial question, which is what do you do? What do you do? What is your world?
So, gosh, no, you're going to throw me into a spiral. So I have two different hats. I'm the director at work, so I spend, if there's somebody storing explosive material in their office, it becomes my problem.
Right.
But I also run a lab. And in my lab, we study human communication and things we do with our voices and how our brains process that. So I run behavioural studies, we're doing a lot of stuff on ASMR actually at the moment. And I run brain imaging studies. So we've got a study lined up looking at how ASMR affects the brain.
And when you say lab, the immediate image that comes to my mind is white coats and jars and pumps. And is it that, or is it something very different?
No, it's a lot of people in their offices, and then we have testing spaces. So there's a big old brain scanner that I go and use, which is up near Russell Square.
A brain scanner is an MRI.
Exactly, an MRI machine.
Right.
Yeah, and we also use sort of physiological responses. So we measure things like, we have a lab set up where we can be measuring how your sweat changes when you're stressed, or how your breathing changes when you're speaking or singing. So these kind of body measures.
So it really is a genuine comedy lab. I mean, I thought you were sort of metaphorically suggesting that it was, as you say, an office. But actually, if you've got an MRI scanner and you're testing sweat, that is getting pretty close to a scientific laboratory.
It is. It's all sort of. It's all a lot less exciting than white coats and test tubes. But it is. One of the things I find interesting about studying humans is you've got to use a variety of measures. You'll never get to an understanding of human behaviour if you just take one thing. If you only scan brains, you're never going to learn about how people feel, And if you only scan people taking part in computer-based experiments, you'll never understand how people talk in natural conversations. So you need observational studies. You need cross-cultural studies. You need the brain scanning studies. I'm just starting a study working at the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability in Putney, looking at how people with disorders of consciousness are affected by and experience music. So, it's really broad sort of, but that you need that. The humans are so complicated. You're never going to, you need to make sure that you've got many different ways of sort of approaching their behaviour.
So if we were to start focusing in on humour and funny, at a kind of physiological or human level, what's happening here? What are we doing? Because it's an odd thing, laughter, isn't it? It's an odd thing. What
I do is I start from a position of separating them and then kind of bringing them back together. So you can consider them to be different phenomena. So laughter is primarily a social behaviour. It's something you do when you're with other people. And although we do laugh at stuff that's funny, most of the time when people laugh, it's not at stuff that's funny. People are laughing for purely social reasons. So, for example, you're 30 times more likely to laugh if there's somebody else with you than if you're on your own. And you'll laugh more if you know that person, and you'll laugh more if you like that person. So it's a sort of, it's involved in social bonding and affiliation and communication. It has that life. It also, and of course, that can also include laughing at things. So, there's definitely funny things as part of that life, but it's got this bigger kind of social role. It also has this older evolutionary history. So if you look at other animals that laugh, which as far as we can see is likely to be most mammals, it's really associated, again, with social bonding. It first appears when infants are tickled by parents, parent gorilla,
Literally tickled, as opposed to tickled mentally.
No, tickled, yeah.
Okay.
And then it becomes very strongly associated with play, and all mammals play. And laughter functions as a very important sort of invitation to play and showing that your intentions are playful. So rats have it doesn't sound like our laughter, but they have a vocalization that they produce when they're tickled and they produce when they're playing. And if you have a rat that can't make any sounds, it's devocalized, so it doesn't make noises. It will play with the other rats, and the other rats will play with it because they're very social and they play a lot. But the devocalized rats are more likely to get bitten during play because they can't make the sound that shows that they're still being playful.
Right.
Really complicated. That's in rats.
Yeah. So would you say that dogs and cats laugh? Are you going that far? Or?
Yes, I would go that far. I think probably more so dogs, because dogs are very social, and also dogs, like humans and otters, they play their whole lives. Most mammals stop playing when they stop being juveniles. Like, can be interesting with cats, domesticated cats, if we could sort of look at how their play vocalizations are used.
A friend of ours runs a comedy club, and you must have the same. I remember them talking about the people that come in, and the couples are great because, to your research that highlights, the more you actually like the person you're laughing with, the more you're likely to laugh. Groups are good, but actually stags and hens are a nightmare.
Yeah.
And of course, presumably that's because they don't necessarily like each other or know each other. So they're actually in this sort of slightly hostile group of.
It's much more, exactly. Yes, it can be a much more random group. There isn't that sort of cohesion necessarily. They're together for this other reason. They wouldn't necessarily have all been at exactly that. That's really interesting.
So in the, and obviously we've had canned laughter for decades of broadcast comedy, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which presume is instilling a recognition of other laughter. It's very viral laughter, isn't it? How does that work?
It is really interesting. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you on a horrible deep dive because I got obsessed with this. So we've found that adding laughter onto jokes makes the jokes seem funnier.
Yeah.
And we did this study just before the first lockdown. And of course, we went into lockdown, and programs like QI were getting broadcast without a studio audience.
Yeah.
And it was weird and very odd. The voices sound like they're in this big echoey space, and there wasn't this warm laughter kind of echoing back to you. And it is really striking if you go back to, like, the first broadcast comedy, of course, was on the radio. And the BBC had a problem whereby people didn't realise stuff was meant to be funny because they were used to consuming comedy in a place they'd be part of an audience. And now you're at home, and if there isn't any sense of an audience. That feeling wasn't there. So that very early on, they started using Hancock shows recorded in front of a live audience.
The radio theatre.
Exactly, the radio theatre. And then that became how you broadcast comedy. So when people started making television programmes, they carried it over. So you have that feeling of an audience and you know that it's meant to be funny. And then in the 60s, because it's expensive doing that, people start using a laugh track. And the Hanna-Barbera cartoons would be a good example. Or
oh yes, you're right.
You can sort of hear it turning on.
Flintstones.
Yeah.
There's laughter. This isn't filmed in a live studio. These are cartoons.
No one is laughing at this.
Right.
But even things like Monty Python, they weren't filming it. A lot of it was being filmed on film. They then, or ripping yarns. You remember that? They then showed it. The BBC would show it to an audience, so there was laughter for it.
Capture it.
And then you kind of get to the 90s and people start being a bit more confident in, I don't think they always need a laughter. And there had been, MASH in the UK was shown without a laugh track, and in the US it was with, so people, it was already kind of going that direction. And very famously, The Office has this kind of documentary thing and no laugh track. And then that starts to become, the whole thing starts to bifurcate a bit, and you'll find there's still stuff that's filmed in front of a live studio audience like Mrs. Brown's Boys, and it's part of the whole kind of ethos of the show and part of the atmosphere of the show. And other things they don't even leave gaps for you to laugh. There's no laughter, and the next joke comes really quickly. They aren't even assuming you're laughing at home, so because you might just be watching on your own. So it's definitely become a lot more complex now, but there still is that root of laughter kind of helps you, I don't know, understand it's meant to be funny, get the sense of, okay, there's a punchline, let me think about what happened. It's very striking if you look at people filming their stand-up specials. I haven't been able to find a single example of anybody who's done that to silence. They always want a theatre full of people laughing well, because that will give the viewer at home that feeling of the live gig. Yeah.
That's a great arc of the history of the laughter track, basically. It's now fallen into pretty much obsolescence, really. But it was critical at the very beginnings to give people permission and signals to...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. The idea of doing live at the Apollo without the audience...
It's daunting.
Well,
isn't it?
Yes.
But then, I don't think, did Little Britain have laughter on it? I'm not sure it did.
I don't think it did.
There's some sketch show stuff doesn't. I'm not sure I don't think the Fox show had any laughter on it.
Fox show did.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. Again, that would have been shown to an audience.
Right.
Oh, right.
But so the early Alan Partridge ones, in fact, I think the very early ones, there was actually a live studio audience. And then when he comes back to the Travel Tavern, that's been shown to a live audience because there's laughter on it. And then, of course, after that, it stops having it. In fact, it's quite jarring to go back to the Travel Tavern ones because you're not expecting laughter.
And Billy talked about that briefly. And he was explaining that they deliberately shot it in a 360 way, but the audience were behind the set.
Yeah.
So Steve would go out to the audience, warm them up, and then go out and be Alan Partridge on camera, and they were capturing the real audience. Because Billy was saying there was complaints about the level of the laughter, but that was it wasn't.
Real.
They weren't over faking it. It was the real audience laughing.
Just before we move in perhaps to some of the more operational parts of what makes something funny, what makes you laugh? Do you have any comedy heroes or any favourite comedy moments?
I have a definite fondness for things I would have watched when I was a kid and watched with my family or would have made me laugh. So, in times of stress, I will go off and watch Porridge.
Right. Yeah.
I like listening to the old Hancock's half-hour radio programs because my father liked them, and it's lovely because my son, who obviously knows nothing about Hancock, absolutely fell in love with them and still listens to them. And it's seeing stuff that's got that kind of age to it, still being funny is lovely.
It's interesting. Sorry to cut you off, but so hold that thought. But it's interesting that you say you go to it in times of stress, as opposed to something else. So. Do you want to sort of dig down on that a bit?
I think because novelty is very important in humour, but familiarity also really. There's a tremendous sense of so watching Porridge or listening to Hancock's Half Hour or watching Ripping Yarn, something I've seen many times but still makes me laugh. There is there's the humour, there's the enjoyment of the performances, because often that's a huge part of it's not like a sort of someone's written these perfect jokes and now they're being brought, emitted at you. The performance is tremendous part of that, and the joy in all the performances in Porridge or Hancock's Half Hour or Ripping Yarns is just amazing. Hattie Jokes is just unbelievably good. And there's something comforting in it having been something that's made you laugh and has made your parents laugh, maybe, that you've got that kind of connection. In that way, I think it resembles music, in that you can happily listen to a favourite piece of music over and over again, and you would kind of, and it gives you emotional sense of resonance. I get that watching like Morecambe and Wise. I've got like a lifetime basically of that having made me laugh, and there's something. I still get the laughter, but I also get that kind of feeling of connection.
Comfort. But I did cut you off because you were about to say so you've said you love Hancock's Half Hour, Porridge. What else? Sorry, I cut you off.
There was some of the Monty Python stuff that happened afterwards. So I really, really love Ripping Yarns, the Terry Jones and Michael Palin series. But I like comedy writing. The Molesworth books, which again, the sort of things that my father's generation found funny.
What books?
They're books supposed to be written by a sort of spotty schoolboy called Nigel Molesworth. But it's actually written by Geoffrey Willans, who I think had been a school headmaster, and they're all illustrated by Ronald Searle, the cartoonist. They're beautifully illustrated, absolutely beautiful, and they're very, very funny. And that, again, that makes me laugh. But one of my greatest joys is that my son finds them very funny and will sort of reference them.
So what you've described there is slightly more vintage comedy. What about the modern day? Anything in the modern day that makes you
with lots of a lot. So this is going to sound very trite, but because I take laughter seriously now, having worked with it, when we went to the first lockdown and it was really, really stressful, and my son was 13 and really stressed out, we were all working from home and our flat's tiny and it was really hard. I said, okay, end of the first day, 5 o'clock, we're putting away all the computers and we are watching something funny. And it almost didn't matter what it was, but we watched all of The American Office, which we hadn't seen before. We watched all of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which we hadn't seen before. We watched the thick of it. We watched all, what we wanted. What I wanted was just the end of the day, we watch something funny and we do it together. I mean, we're not on your phone or anything, and we'll laugh together because I know that will make us feel better. And it's really difficult to find things to make you feel better at the moment. So it's
wow.
So yes, and in fact, my son will be leaving home soon, but he still wants to do that. At the end of the day, okay, let's watch something funny. At the moment, we're working all our way through the entirety of Lie to Me. When I lie to you, the entirety of Would I Lie to You, and that's it's wonderful. There's so many different directions you can go off in to find amazing humour. We're very lucky.
Do you have a comedy hero?
I probably would say, if I was absolutely honest, it would be Dawn French. I'm very, very sensitive to. I have very, minimal amount of exposure to her, and I start talking like her because I just find her very funny, and the way she says things very funny. And when I listen to those old Hancock's Half Hours, I keep hearing my father's voice. My father was like that with Tony Hancock, and I realise one day my son will start watching The Vicar of Dibley and go, "My God, that's my mother."
So Dawn French she's your comedy hero. Great, Timo. Can I pass on to you?
I saw a brilliant thing. You were talking on one of these wonderful TED Talks about deciphering real laughter because there's a part of you said lots of different types of laughter, and one there's a nervous laughter of I'm your friend. I would like to be a friend. So how are you? How are you finding this podcast? Is it okay? And we sort of we kind of laugh sometimes, but it's not a belly laugh. It's not a real. It's a sort of social.
Exactly, it's happening for social reasons. It's communicative. Right. Basically, yeah. So is it just real laugh, not real laugh, sort of social laughter? Is there more types of laughter? So I'm actually defining this, and I apologise, I'm going to get very nerdy on you, actually in terms of brain systems, because human brains have two different ways of controlling motor output, including our voices. And one of them is evolutionarily older, and it's reactive, and it's involuntary. So if someone throws something at your head and you duck, you haven't had time to think I'd better duck. That's like an involuntary mechanism for getting out of harm's way. And we have if you trip up and you go, oh, or there was a mouse somewhere in our flat, and I thought it ran over my foot, and I screamed I screamed for long enough that I had time to think, I don't know why I'm screaming, because I'm not scared of mice and there's no one here. But those involuntary vocalizations, they're under a different kind of brain control than the sort of stuff I'm doing right now with my voice. So, I'm talking, I might be singing. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to. But, the world of voluntary things we can do with communication and vocal communication. So involuntary laughter is when you start laughing and basically you could not stop. You might even be in a situation where you should not be doing this, like on stage.
Been there terribly with Matt Lucas.
It's
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's actually, it just disrupts things, doesn't it? You can't.
Yes.
You can't just turn it off.
You can't. I mean,
And the more disruptive, the more funny.
the instance I'm talking about, yes, it was with Matt Lucas on a job we did in Bucharest, I think it was, called Codmandoon and the Flaming Sword of Fire. And there was a hysteria broke out between us every single time we tried to do a take.
Yeah.
It would just collapse, and it would get worse and worse and worse. And you could look at the crew, and they were sort of, there was no laughter from them. The director literally, please. And that just makes it worse.
Yeah.
It became almost impossible.
You know it when it happens to you. It's actually not that common. And then you've got laughter that for some reason you're producing as part of my more voluntary system. And when I say voluntary, you're not thinking, now I will laugh. In the same way that when you're talking, you kind of have an idea of what you want to express, but you don't have access to how your brain's putting together the words.
No.
You don't really have access to how your brain's thinking some laughter would be good here. But that's effectively what's happening. So it's been shown, for example, that people laugh a lot in conversations. At any one point in time, the person who laughs most in a conversation is frequently the person who's talking. So it really is part of their kind of, exactly like you did before, you're expressing things.
Tell you a joke.
Yeah.
Isn't it good?
Yeah, it's going to be brilliant. And it's not, it's easy to think of that as somehow not real or fake laughter. It's not. And in context, people process it for what it is, which is something communicative, something largely positive, where somebody's showing agreement, understanding. Maybe they're trying to, express to you how much they like you without necessarily knowing that's what they're doing. Maybe they're trying to cover up being a bit embarrassed. Maybe they're trying to get away with a lie. Maybe they are feeling awkward and they're trying to make things feel better by getting everybody laughing. There's actually, the way human adults will use laughter is, it's like dizzying complexity. And all of it sits within that kind of communicative laughter that's not spontaneous laughter. It could go all the way through to somebody sarcastically going, ha! That would still kind of, so it's like there's probably as many different kinds of different sorts of communicative laugh as there are situations where somebody might laugh.
If we were to ask you, what is laughter, what would your professional response to that be, or answer?
It's a non-verbal vocalization of emotion. The emotion is a sort of social joy, because it's a joyful expression that you basically only really happens when you're in interactions with other people, when other people are there. And sometimes it's completely involuntary and helpless, and sometimes it's more communicative. In fact, most of the time it's more communicative. You're using it to express yourself.
So you're using two different definitions there. There's the communicative and the involuntary.
Yeah.
And so just digging down on involuntary, what would be an example of involuntary laughter?
If you listen to that old clip of Jonathan Agnew and Brian Johnson trying to do the Test Match special. And interestingly, because it was Jonathan Agnew's first time doing that, they knew each other, but this is his first time actually on the programme. And all the way through the programme, Brian Johnson had been trying to make him laugh. And then towards the end, when Brian Johnson is speaking, Jonathan Agnew just chips in with this
leg over thing.
Just because of his leg over. And few beats in, and they both just start screaming with laughter, and they're desperately trying to broadcast.
Hilarious, and I've seen it broadcast at a large group with a large group, and it's just infectious. It's
extraordinary.
That's involuntary.
That's involuntary. They're desperately trying to stop laughing, because apparently by the end of it, the producer came around and was just staring at them. Bloody stop it!
What's going on?
And if I was to ask you why were people laughing in that situation, you can't answer necessarily.
Do you know what? There's obviously some sort of cascade, some sort of appraisal of what's happened, maybe some contagion from the other person laughing, and then something triggers it. And if I can get to even any step close to this before I, finally get prized out of the building and made to go and retire. I would love to know more about that kind of sequence of events, but at the moment we just don't know.
You just don't know. So that then takes us to the other part of it, which is we have the involuntary and then the communicative. What can you give us an example of that?
Well, most of the laughter that happens in conversations is communicative, and you can actually tell that because of how it's timed. So when people laugh in conversations, they tend to laugh together. They laugh at the ends of sentences.
Right.
And in fact, that's even true if people are having a sign language conversation where they could, in theory, laugh all the way through. They don't. They laugh at the end of a sentence. And that kind of timing is not how involuntary laughter works. You couldn't time its onset and offset. So it starts together and then you end quite quickly. Now, you'll also, it's also the case that laughter builds to laughter, and sometimes you start off with social communicative laughter and end up crying with laughter, and that can happen. That the line between the two can get blurred, but most of the time it's got this. It easily starts and it easily stops, and that's your signifier that it's being driven by the brain in a different way. It's under more control, if you like.
So I saw you that you picked a lovely clip in one of your talks with Bill Clinton and Putin, wasn't it? Putin's talking in Russian, and is only when he
Yeltsin.
Yeltsin. Sorry,
It's
Yeltsin.
very
Yes.
drunk Boris Yeltsin.
Yeah. And so did that begin voluntary and then end up involuntary? What?
Completely. That's exactly right. So Yeltsin is berating the press through a translator, saying, "Oh, you said I'd be a disaster, but I'm saying you're a disaster," and it's ill-tempered. And Bill Clinton's just watching him like a hawk, standing right next to him. And the first opportunity he gets to behave as if Yeltsin had said something funny, he laughs. And in fact, it's when Yeltsin says his name, "I came to meet Bill Clinton," and he laughs, says, "Oh, that's me, ha ha." And from that point onwards, behaves as if every single thing that Yeltsin's saying is hilarious. And it's so skillfully done because he doesn't look like he's laughing at Yeltsin. He'll look at this fool. He's like, "Oh, this guy's hilarious." He's like, gets his arm around him, pointing at this. And because he's a high status man and he's laughing, everybody else starts laughing. And then it takes a few beats, and then Boris Yeltsin's like, "I'm hilarious." And he starts laughing. And there's a brief period when they really are pretty lost to it. And then they come back, the whole mood has changed. It's phenomenal. It's often, if you look on YouTube, people are like, "Oh, look at these idiots." But it's absolutely deliberate on Clinton's part, I would warrant. It was perfect.
Genius.
That actually speaks to an observation about comedy generally, which I think is if people are funny, we think they're silly. But they're not. It's actually the very, very opposite. But it's a very easy conclusion to make.
Yeah.
Oh, if you're funny, you're silly. You're a clown. But it's not actually. There's
People think that stand-ups just stand up and riff. Should be any idea. No one would take that risk. You know exactly what they're going to say.
Well, it's got Bill Snedden, the editor, worked in his former years with Billy Connolly, and he still holds him in such high regard because unlike many of the stand-up acts, which are very carefully orchestrated and rehearsed and refined and perfected, Billy did just rumble, and was just a true art form.
Exactly, such skill to do that.
To have the confidence to go, "I've got 5 words on a piece of paper here, and I know that's a joke, it's quite funny, but I'll probably leave it and go somewhere else and come back." And we were talking about how people seem to find what appears to be improvisation to be slightly funnier. So a lot of the thick of it that Alex did brilliantly with that team, by wobbling the camera about, by making it all just seem it's all a bit casual. It's sort of died down, and a lot of the script was improvised and then perfected, and then. But that why would it be? Why do we find it funnier if we feel that something's just there on the cuff as opposed to a brilliant orchestra? But if I go and hear an orchestra player, I know they've rehearsed it to the 8th degree, and then I respect that. Whereas you go to see jazz and they're jamming, and there's no reason why. But why would we find it funnier if it doesn't seem well prepared?
I think I'm not certain I can give you a good answer, but I think it's because we associate the humour with the person.
Right.
So there's quite good evidence that people find stuff funnier if they think it was told by a famous comedian or a person they know to be a comedian than someone who's famous but not a comedian. So if they think a joke was told by Sarah Millican, they think it's funnier than they think if it was told by, I don't know, Theresa May.
That's very interesting. If Sarah Millican told a joke and everybody laughed, Mrs. Thatcher might tell a joke, the very same joke, and they wouldn't laugh.
They wouldn't laugh.
What's going on there?
It seems to be the social role. So if you've got the role of the person who's the comedian, then you're both permitted to tell a joke, and it's also expected that you'll tell a joke, and it's expected that what you're doing is funny. But because we locate it at the person, and because we don't take comedy seriously, as you just said, that often means we sort of assume that person's just funny, and they're just sort of, they're kind of winging it because they can, because they're just funny. Whereas you say, I mean, sometimes people really are improvising, but a lot, there's all points in between where people have got a very well polished act that they make look spontaneous because they're good performers. And it's always come back to the performance. But I think that's the thing. I think we don't recognize the art. We don't attribute it to people. We think that they're sort of inherently just able to produce this stuff, and it's really hard to get yourself out of that space. It's the comedy perform. The shocking thing to me about I was a child about Porridge was that Ronnie Barker was an actor. He didn't talk like that. What? Wait, what? It's not, he wasn't just going on and being himself. It was a performance. And it's all a performance, and a very skilled and amazing performance.
But how interesting that confidence in, even though Ronnie Barker is acting, there's a whole impacted around a subtext of, this is a guy who's very funny and he can improvise extremely well. Yeah. So when he does land a line that's got some humour to it, your confidence, you're there on the armchair leaning forward going, I'm ready to laugh here.
Yeah.
Which is so if you were trying to create comedy, because this is what we're trying to unpick with this fun podcast, Alex and I, if you're trying to sit down crafting, and it might be a content, it may be ads, it may be a series, it may be a comedy show, what do you think from an intellectual, neurological aspect, what are the things are we trying to do to be successful in doing it? We talked about the sociability. What?
So I think one of the there is a world of humour comedy research, and one of the main things they've found is that over time and over place, there's not one thing that everybody finds funny. And do you remember 20-something years ago, everyone was going, "What's up?"
Yeah.
It was funny, very funny for an amount of time, and then wasn't funny anymore, and you'd be mortified if someone started doing it, or Gangnam Style, again, a amount of time and it was funny. Oh, it's not funny anymore. There's an aesthetic element to humour, as there is to your enjoyment of any art form. Books, music. We don't all like the same stuff, and your appraisal and enjoyment of the stuff is always going to be coloured by your aspirations for yourself, and sort of what that might be from what the comedy was that you saw when you were growing up, and it might also be what your friends like. Who did I see on television? How is it presented to me? Does it kind of look like it's something that people like me like? You're not thinking that consciously, but it's going to influence what you think, how you feel about stuff. So we're never engaging with comedy in a way that goes, okay, that's like someone's done the correct sums to make a joke perfectly funny. There's that Monty Python joke, isn't there, about the funniest joke in the world, and it kills the man who's written it, and they have to translate it one word at a time and then turn it into a weapon. That's not actually how humour works. There are sometimes jokes have a mathematical element to them, but more generally, it is about what's being said, but it's also about how it's being performed and the kind of framing of it, and taking you back to the people and the sort of your social understanding of it, your engagement with the entire thing. You're never really sort of abstracting out the joke and saying, well, that was funny, but I didn't like the rest of it. If you don't like a comedian, it is very unlikely they'll make you laugh. And whereas if you do, like, there's some old clip of Morecambe and Wise on Michael Parkinson's show, and they come on and Eric makes some throwaway line about Raquel Welch, who's just been the previous guest, and the audience go berserk, and it's because they just wanted to laugh. He gives them something right at the top, like, I know this is what you want, let's get that over with, we've got our laughter going.
So I love that. So it's like we all walk around life trying to look to make ourselves happy, to content ourselves the best we can. So we are, and it's lovely, the atmosphere in the room in a comedy night, or you go to see, always say a famous comedian. Everybody's excitement is because they're there desperately wanting to laugh. We're on the side of, we've invested time and money, we want to laugh,
So I think, and also what I did there was I told you what I can't tell you. So there isn't a rule,
No.
but there are some other general principles. So
So these are, just so we've got some clarity for the listener, these are, we're about to enter into the world of rules for laughter or rules for comedy.
well, basically the two, because
Okay.
I've sort of said, oh, they're different. And it is the case that laughter's older than us, but there are no examples of animal humour. And people get very cross when I tell them this, but in the wild, you just don't find it. There are sometimes when humans have interactions with animals and animals are used to humans, they certainly do things to make humans laugh, but that's slightly different. The animals don't laugh. Soon as modern humans appear on the earth, they start writing, making marks on the world. We find records of things that are supposed to be funny. It is as old as us. And one argument for this is that maybe, going back to how widespread play is, humour may be a way of getting to laughter through not having to chase each other around up and down a tree. We can do it more efficiently and in this kind of social setting where we're already talking to each other. So people need to know that it's meant to be funny. So however you can tip them onto that, and sometimes that's as simple as this person we know to be a funny person.
Yeah. Stick
You
out.
know,
in it.
That's very interesting. So you actually need a signal to say, this is going to be funny.
And it used to be, it used to be really, if you think back, stand-up's a relatively recent art form, but you don't have to go back too far, and people were doing it, the badum tish, when they got to a punchline, because that's the funny bit.
Yeah, you're allowed to laugh now.
But now you're allowed to laugh, but nowadays people might take a sip of a drink or do a big exhalation or go, things like, they're all these little tells, just, okay, audience, because it's a much more dynamic thing than I always thought the person on stage made a joke and then the audience were like, funny, I'll laugh. It's not. It's more, they're kind of, it's like a weird conversation where only the comedian gets to talk. Obviously, that's not all humour, but it really helps to have that some kind of indication. So that could simply be that the person, it could be, what people think of as comedy voices. It changes all the time, but again, you go back to Monty Python, they keep doing these voices that were thought,
I'm funny now.
Exactly. My intention is to be humorous. It might be clothing. Again, you go back in time, comedians would always have a certain, when Wise were first on the stage, the comic would be dressed in a way that indicated I'm the one who's funny and the feed is wearing something straighter. It's literally that simple. People's ability to be sophisticated about these things continuously changes and continuously. So the rules are different now, but they still need to know.
This first rule is the audience need to be signalled to
somehow
via some signpost.
Could be very subtle.
But this is we're in the realm of comedy rather than serious and dramatic.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one rule. Any others?
And then once you've signposted it well, what do you then need to do to be successful in being funny?
I think you need to have the confidence to do it. So one of the things audiences really fear is stuff that's got the hallmarks it's meant to be funny, like I'm at a comedy night, and then somebody is doing something that's not landing and they look panicked. The flip side of this is one of the things that can really work well about comedy and humour is you're confident enough to do it at all. You're comfortable doing it. And that's a really relaxing thing for people to be engaged. This is going to be all right. Not only do they intend to be funny, they're going to be funny. They don't look like they're worried about it. Kevin Hart is an absolute hero of cracking himself up about what he's about to say. And it works to make you think this is going to be very funny. It's made him laugh. He doesn't look like, I don't know if they're going to like this one bit.
That confidence is critical,
Yeah.
even if it's not genuine.
Yes.
You need to play confident with it.
Yeah.
Very.
Yes, and actually, and back to your signalling that the conscious rather than the unconscious bit. If you're telling a joke and you're laughing halfway through because you're already entertained by where it's going, it's just a neat way of signalling this is going to be fun. But was it Ronnie Corbett?
Yeah.
In his little bit, didn't he always just laugh at his own jokes?
Laugh at his own jokes.
But, quite charmingly.
Yeah, exactly.
And almost self-corpse before he got anywhere near what was often a fairly average joke. But somehow the whole thing was so charming, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So signposting, confidence. Anything else?
There isn't a rule that says this is how you make something funny, and not everybody will find the same stuff funny. So you just have to not worry that you're going to be able to sort of perfect everything so it will always be perfect and everyone will like it. You're just going to have to take that on the chin. That's not going to happen. but if they are laughing, then it's funny. You just, and it's, sometimes you have to let yourself, I can't believe I'm telling comedy writers this, this, but sometimes there's no absolute rule. You find out by doing it, and you refine things based on that. What is the funniest way to do this?
Mm-hmm.
How do we shape this such that it is going to be the funniest order in which to say these words? And that is more of an art than a science, but you should let yourself find it.
Yes, so because a lot of stand-ups do off-grid tests and lab work with smaller audiences to see, oh no, that doesn't land there, it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that is, So if we were to call that a rule, as it were, it would be to have the courage to sort of experiment.
Yeah. Find out by doing it what is there might be something that's a funny idea, and I often hear comedians talk about how okay, it's a funny idea, how do I make it work? How do I frame it such that it can sit in that space? And then within that, what literally the nuts and the bolts of how do I word this such that this is the funniest way of saying it.
Executing. Yeah.
So this, as I say, I'm not in any sense a stand-up comedian, but I have a set where I introduce, I'm talking about the silliness of trying to study human brains. And I'm just saying real examples of things that are happening to me in the lab, which is, I say things, I've seen things you humans wouldn't believe, the Blade Runner thing, and these are somebody climbing out of the window and running away rather than finish an experiment, somebody getting the end of an experiment, and we said to her, okay, let us explain the experiment to her, and she went, I've been conducting my own experiments. And somebody getting bottom first into a brain scanner, and I thought that was the funny order. Bottom first into a brain scanner, that's golden. Nope, the funny order is bottom first into brain scanner, climbing out of the window and running away, and I've been conducting my own experiment. And I just found that out by doing it over different nights. That's the funny order. And so there's no way around it. You've got to, that you can't, just because they'll even if it's funny, you can make it funnier by that kind of.
Totally.
A few people we've talked to mention the importance of truth, or being, there's certainly definitely, there's a big aspect of stand-up where they're not telling jokes, or some people Tim Vine tells jokes.
Yeah.
But some people, they're Peter Kays and tell truths in a way.
It's observational stuff. Yeah, exactly. In stories. Yeah.
What's going on there at a neurological, physiological body way? If you're told the truth, why is that funny? Why if you just tell me something I already know, you're not educating me in any way. Why do I find I want to laugh when you tell me something I already know?
There's a really nice quote from the late Clive James, who said, humour is common sense dancing. And there is something about that. One of the beauties of observational comedy is that people reframe something that you do think you know.
Right.
To show you absurd aspects of it, or hilarious aspects of it, or how they're bad at it, or how it went wrong sometime. And it gives you some different kind of. There's a routine Michael McIntyre does about why salt and pepper are always on the table, condiments, and all the other spices are in a cupboard. And it goes through how jealous they are and all their different emotions. I got taken out once for goulash, and then I've never been out again. And they put me in backwards. But it's a sort of perfect bit, because
it's a very good observation. I've never thought about, why does salt and pepper get such priority out of all the spices?
We are here.
And I wouldn't have. Yeah, he's drawn my attention to that, which I find delightful. That's very stimulating. Oh, but why is that funny?
I think because we recognise the intention that it's meant to be funny.
Right.
That comes back
clever
to say,
signposting.
exactly. He performs it. He's a very physical performer. He does lots of voices and sort of position. And it's funny just to think about it, but he's ramping up every way of kind of, he's doing everything you could be doing on the stage to help make that the most sort of amusing and engaging experience for you. It's going back to that performance. It's not just. That observation is funny. You add to it so much more by all the other bits around the edge.
But then Michael McIntyre can do it in a way that makes the audience roar with laughter.
Yeah.
Yes, and what's going on there?
Well, I think it's that you are perceiving. You've come to a Michael McIntyre gig. You're going to see comedy, and I think that is a huge part of that. The part A, you're going to laugh more because you're in an audience, and B, that audience is expecting this to make them laugh, and that's a massive part of it. You can find yourself being surprised at something you weren't expecting to be funny is funny. I once had to do stand-up comedy at the Royal Society in the afternoon before tea, because I was stopping people from getting their tea. And after a talk about neonatal care, it was the worst possible environment for doing stand-up comedy. I had like 8 minutes to do. Oh my days. Took me about 3 minutes to get them laughing. I thought, I'm going to get there in the end. I will get there in the end. But then what's happening? What's this woman? She got no slides. What's happening? This isn't about neonatal care. So that's, that it's possible. But if people are expecting it, like you say, they want to laugh.
Yeah.
They are looking for that. So it's not, you're an active participant. Your viewer is an active participant in this thing. They're expecting it. And that's of course, one of the clever things about, when humour works in advertising, again, people associate it with the brand and they are looking for it. So that's, like the character, like the person on stage, you're kind of putting the brand there instead.
This is just coming onto this.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is such a powerful hammer for brands to use humour?
I think because it can be, simply the confidence of doing it. Like we are comfortable enough and confident enough that this is funny. That's already quite a big
Statement.
And sometimes you see brands doing things, I've never even heard of them, but actually that was funny, and it makes you see it's not just the sort of the maybe the affection and the memories that humour can also lead to. You've got a sort of like a stance that you're taking that's sort of
A swagger.
yeah.
It's a great answer, right? In terms of, yes, it's the confidence.
Consumers need to have confidence in brands, and especially in a world where we're finding it hard to trust anything. Authenticity, but confidence is such an important thing, especially not just financial products or other things but trusting a brand is and the brand to seem confident. What you're saying is just to take on comedy, to even try and be funny, but ideally successfully.
Yeah.
It gives the customer an enormous reassurance of trust and confidence. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's that reassurance, yeah.
And don't assume that because you find something funny, everybody will find it funny. Let yourself be as broad as you need to for the audience that you want. So I think the Specsavers campaign is really interesting, and it's just that it's achieved that level of getting out into like the wider world. People say it, but it should have gone to Specsavers, and it's been done. It's not like the funniest joke in the world, but actually they've used it cleverly, but not so cleverly that it seals too.
You've done one of those.
One of my first ever jobs was for a Specsavers campaign. And I think, I used to get shouted at in the street.
Yeah.
Should have gone to Specsavers.
Yeah.
This was a while ago.
Yes, probably at the time thinking, thank you for that. But yeah.
Can I ask you a couple of quick-fire questions? What do you think the point of comedy is?
I think the point of comedy is to enjoy the connection and the sort of social joy of laughter, but in a context where you've got human creativity and innovation and performance and all sort of mixed into it, because it is an art form. It doesn't just happen randomly. So I think it's got that, it's built on all the social stuff that's true about laughter is also true about comedy. The social role matters, how much you like the comedian matters, but also you want, the performance has got to be right, the character's got to be right, the material's got to be right. That's, and that gets, very creative and artistic and particular very, very quickly, and in a way that can be, what might work for one person wouldn't work for somebody else as a performer. It's got to be right for your character. And that's, humans love producing that kind of material and they adore consuming it. And I'd fully include comedy in why do we write music? Why do we write books? Because humans really like engaging with the products of other humans' creativity and innovation. And what you get with humour is the connection and the laughter as well.
Can I ask about surprise? Because I think that's also come up in a few conversations we've had with people, that one of the key integral parts of making something funny is surprise. And I suppose Monty Python go back, the Goons to a degree. Some of it was quite abstract and quite surprising, or some of it was very carefully planted as the jokes go. And I love I remember that lovely the funniest sketch of all, the funniest joke. they're setting up a very obvious result, that they're signposting someone is going to open this and die laughing. So you know that's coming up.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, it happens. They die laughing and it's really funny. But there's no surprise there. But sometimes surprise works. Sometimes just a funny joke works where there's no surprise. Where are we on that? Where do you think, what's going on here?
It is interesting because, as you say, sometimes stuff still is funny, even if it's strongly signposted. Other times, one of the things we enjoy about comedy can be that it takes you somewhere you're totally not expecting. That they just did not see that coming at all. I don't think I think that's people's enjoyment of. That's also true. Like when you read a poem, or when you're reading a book, sometimes it's satisfying if it actually plays out exactly as you want to see it. And other times you're like, well, I did not see this coming again, but that's a really satisfying ending. And I think a good comparison is with magic. Like when we watch someone doing magic, like with somebody's telling jokes, that they're going to do something to make you laugh because that's why they're there. The magician is going to do something that you can't see how they did it. It doesn't make you laugh.
Yeah.
When the prestige happens, but you've got your
satisfaction.
And you have to go, I wonder if there was something in there all along or something like that. But it doesn't matter. You can't, it's not actually magic. This is a performance of some kind. And actually the thing itself is that you can't see the workings. You can't see how you have been tricked. And that's what we enjoy about it, but we don't laugh at it. So, I think it's not just surprises leading to the laughter. It's part of what we enjoy in things. Generally, but it doesn't always have to be there.
And what happens inside us when we get that satisfaction? Is there something physiological that's interesting that is going on at a brain or endorphin or level? Something that's why are we lusting after this happiness all the time? What's wrong with us?
It might well involve sort of dopamine in that it's a rewarding experience, and I think it is. I mean, if you just look at humans, we love. Oh, it's a puzzle. I'm going to solve it. Oh, it's a magic actor. I'm going to try and work out how he's done it, but I haven't, oh, this is a comedian. It's sort of, there's something known and unknown at the same time, in that this puzzle will somehow be solvable. The crossword is never not solvable. The comedian will at some point be doing something to try and make you laugh because that's the contract that you have with them. But that doesn't mean that you'll necessarily find it funny or that it would be, you know what I mean? We enjoy that ambiguity. We're happy to, and getting something that will have some form of resolution is rewarding, I suspect, in that way. But it can be so many different aspects of our lives actually look like that. We're we're novelty-seeking animals, humans. We want that, come on, here's a mystery, let me solve it. Solve it.
Can I go sort of very, very closely, which is another topic that's really hot, is we're fascinated by AI now, aren't we? And I suppose in our industry, certainly in advertising and in creative television, we're all okay. To what degree can computers do what we do? Do you think AI can be funny? Can computers get there?
I think at the moment, if they do, it's because they're just the large language model things are just scraping everything off the internet, and they know about the order in which words go. So.
So they're plagiarizing in effect.
Well, there are court cases. I think comedians like Sarah Silverman are sort of the front end of people going to these companies and saying, "You guys can't state my material that way." And certainly, if you ask it to produce you funny material, like we have this brain sciences comedy night, and one of my colleagues, because he was anxious about his set, asked ChatGPT to write him an 8-minute set about brain science comedy, and he said it was absolutely execrable.
Really?
Just awful, because it was a whole sequence of bad jokes. There was just it was horrible, and there was no what's going back to your point about authenticity. Even if it's Michael McIntyre isn't actually spending all his time thinking about salt and pepper, there's you can imagine it's something he's thought about too much by the way he tells the story. This feels real, feels personal, feels true to that character, and it's very hard for the artificial intelligence as it exists to sort of, for example, have a theory of mind about what the audience want. How does the comedian want to present themselves to that audience? What would be a thing that I would say? So again, reality check. I do science-based stand-up, but I did a practice run-through, and somebody suggested to me something I should say, and then she went, "Actually, no, I can't see you saying that." And I was like, "No, I don't think it would be. It'd be funny if someone else said it. It wouldn't be funny if I said it."
Right.
So And that kind of appraisal is much harder for AI at the moment.
Going back to your comedy lab, literally, in terms of the use of the scanner and the use of the other chemicals you've applied, etc., over the last few years, what would you say makes something funny? Having observed what's emerged from your lab, could you distill it down to this makes something funny?
I can't, because I don't think science, there are points where science stops helping you. And I think science can't tell you why I liked this book and you didn't like it. It can't tell me why this bit of music makes your hair stand on end and the same bit of music you don't ever want to hear again. Because at a certain point, we've got these enormous brains. We have got 86 billion brain cells, and 86 billion brain cells, and you're born with almost all of them. So you've basically got one brain for life, and that brain is shaped by all the experiences you've had. No one else has got your brain. So it'd be just impossible for there to be, you move past the point where you can say objectively, this is a rule will work for all humans. Because for humans, you always start to move into this more aesthetic appreciation where it starts to get very personal. And there might be things that are, for more people, I find funny than others. Michael McIntyre enjoys tremendous success, as he should. But there are still people who won't, because at the bottom line, it's an aesthetic appreciation. You can't get all the things lined up properly and say, now this will be a perfect joke, because it just won't work for humans that way. Humans are more complicated.
Is there anything, I suppose, the tip question, I suppose, is there anything of all the great, clever people you've worked with over a series of these, is there anything you picked up off someone else that you thought, oh, that's so true? Is there anything
you've stolen?
There's a really good quote. It's actually something about scientific writing. I think it's about scientific writing. With anything good I've ever, I'm going to mess it up completely, but it basically goes something like, anything good I've ever written was all in the editing. And I think just that, that kind of going back to the nuts and the bolts in comedy writing really matter. The idea can be very funny, but you can always make it funnier by how exactly you put those words together or those ideas together.
Thank you so much, Professor
It's a pleasure.
Sophie Scott.
CBE. Yes. It's got to be used. That was a fabulous.
Amazing.
Oh, that was
Fabulous
really
insight.
interesting.
Thank you.